Hi, and welcome back to the Freshet Friday podcast, your weekly wrap-up of news, issues, events, and fun stories from the Burnaby, New Westminster, and Tri-Cities communities of British Columbia.
I'm your host, Geof Wheelwright.
This is our podcast for Friday, March 27th, and today we're taking an early look at how the fall municipal elections are shaping up, housing issues in our community, highlights of stories from the past week, sports, and upcoming events. With me today are the founders of Freshet News, Mario Bartel, Janice Clue, Teresa McManus, and Cornelia Naylor. Happy Friday to you. Before we do anything else, I do want to mention that our latest print edition came out just yesterday, so get your copy today. Not only is it our largest so far, but it's also the last one we'll be publishing on a monthly basis. Starting next month, you'll be able to get new print editions of Freshet News in print twice a month, online every day, and this podcast every week, of course.
With that, I wanted to turn to a fascinating story that Cornelia wrote about the upcoming fall elections and how they're shaping up in Burnaby. So take it away, Cornelia.
Yeah, this is the first big news we've gotten about the municipal election coming up in October. Burnaby's ruling party, the Burnaby Citizens Association, that's dominated Burnaby City Council for some terms now, announced 4 new candidates that had been nominated for city council. And these are newcomers. These are not people who are currently on council. Their names: Ryan Irwin, Cindy Lee, Rhea Park, and Kiran Singh. And we'll be finding more about them in the coming weeks. But that means that some of the 7 sitting councillors, BCA councillors, mean that they're not running again. So what we found out is that Sav Dhaliwal has confirmed that he won't be running again, and he announced that at council, and so did Alison Gu. Pietro Calendino, according to Sav Dhaliwal, is also not running again, but he hasn't officially announced that at council. Since posting that story, Alison Gu has officially said that she's not running again. She's the youngest ever city councillor elected to Burnaby City Council. She said she was stepping down. I asked Councillor Sav Dhaliwal, about this, and he said that, the BCA is going to lose some really experienced councillors. Pietro Calendino and he have been on council since 2002. And there also won't be a mayoral race. Another thing we learned is that the BCA isn't going to be put up a mayoral candidate. That doesn't mean there won't be a race, actually. I should correct myself. He actually hopes there is a mayoral race because it will, quote unquote, keep the mayor on his toes and encourage voter participation. Maybe voters will be more excited if there's a mayoral race because they sure weren't in 2022 when there wasn't. The voter turnout was dismal. So, that's the big news.
Fascinating. Any hint of what the big issues are going to be?
Well, I did ask about that. One of the things that Sav Dhaliwal asked him, what has changed over his 7 terms? He's in his 7th term right now. What's changed over those terms? And one of the things he said is that social issues have become much more important. Things that really aren't actually municipal responsibilities, but that municipalities, cities have stepped up to try to do things around housing, do things around homelessness, do things around affordability, things that are almost a little outside of their scope. Those things, he said, people are going to raise those issues, and it'll be up to politicians how they negotiate that, given that those are often responsibilities of other levels of government.
Great. Thanks, Cornelia. How are things looking in Coquitlam, Janice?
In Coquitlam, we have one councillor who is running for mayor. His name's Craig Hodge. And coincidentally, he worked with us at the Tri-City News. And so that'll be one position open, as well as Brent Asmundson is, after a long time on council. Brent Asmundson, former Burnaby resident, is going to be vacating his seat. So we have at least 2 council seats open. And we do have another returning officially. His name is Matt Jolich, and he is a first-time councillor.
Fantastic. And Teresa, any hints of what's coming up in New Westminster?
So far, things have been fairly quiet. We have the New West Progressives who have announced their full slate for council. They've been rolling that out for the last few months, really. They've got mayoralty candidate Daniel Fontaine, a current first-term city councillor, and then a slate of 6 council candidates. On the other side of the council chambers, if you will, Community First New West, they are expected to announce some of their candidates It's within the next month or so, I believe. There could be an announcement coming as soon as next week about one of the candidates, I'm told.
And Mary, are you hearing any election news in the grapevine that we haven't heard?
Things have been percolating quietly in Port Moody. It's always been an interesting political landscape in that city, and I think it was in September that a new party was formed called Port Moody Voice, and then just about a month and a half ago, they announced their first candidate, which is Haven Lerbecki. Currently, she's a sitting councillor on Port Moody Council, and she will be the mayoral candidate for Port Moody Voice. Port Moody Voice says it wants to put residents back at the center of decisions, and a lot of those decisions are about growth and development and parks in Port Moody. So it should be interesting. Mayor Lockie has not yet said publicly where she's leaning. She says she wants to focus on running the city right now.
Fascinating. And any burning issues that are animating all of the candidates?
Well, in Port Moody, it's always about growth. I mean, the city's facing a lot of pressure from the province to grow. It was one of the first cities named by the province to step up to fulfill its mandates to build more housing, and it's starting to do that. Several large developments have been approved by this council around the Moody Centre SkyTrain station. Some people are not happy about that, and that will probably be the big divisive issue in this fall.
And Teresa, I know that housing's also been a big issue in New Westminster, particularly around the proposed tiny homes village. And I know there was an open house this last week. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, BC Housing hosted an open house. There was sort of stations set up around the room. Outside, there was a group of about 40 folks, I would imagine, from a group. I don't know that it was actually New Westminster based, but they were out there with placards. Inside, it was wall to wall people when I first got there, and I was there for pretty much most of the event, sort of circling the room and trying to listen in on some of the conversations. There was clearly some residents who are concerned. A lot of frustration, I would say, about the process because the community didn't learn about this until was basically a site had been selected. So there was some concern about that. I also did talk to quite a number of people there who supported it, and think that it's very important that it proceed. Variety of reasons, mostly just because these folks are unhoused or living in the shelter system already, and that this would be a transitional type of housing where they would be able to access services. But yeah, no, it was the good meeting in the sense that I think staff from BC Housing and the city were there to ask questions. There were some people who were concerned that they weren't able to get the answers to the questions that they had because an operator at this time, at least as far as we're aware, has not been selected. So in terms of very specific questions about the operations, those will come out once the operator has been determined.
So is that the next step?
Then that is something that's coming up by mid-year, they say. So yeah, that should be coming up within the next month or two, I would imagine. Next steps, I think they're just getting that feedback from residents, and the portables or the modular homes should be arriving sometime this month. And I guess I'll have to check in with City Hall to see what the next step is in terms of the actual installation of those. There's some work on the site that will have to be done before that starts to happen.
So when is the earliest that people could actually get into those houses and start living?
When BC Housing officials came to City Council, they were hoping by the end of the year. In my last discussion with BC Housing, it was end of 2026, early 2027. I mean, I think the hope is that they can get them in there when the weather's really cold and crappy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, hopefully it's before the end of the year.
I guess that's depending on which side of the debate you're on, I mean, I think everybody wants people to be housed, but there was quite a few people that were not, happy with that choice of location. There were some people that were concerned that the tenants who will live there would actually be able to leave the site, at which point there was kind of some interesting discussions between different residents that were sort of in some circles saying, well, it's not a prison. So we shall see where this goes.
Yeah, that's a fascinating concept. The idea of people not being able to leave the site where their homes are?
Yeah, I think that there is some fear out there about, potential impacts on neighbors if people who, maybe have mental health or addiction issues are in the neighborhood.
Yeah, so was there anything discussed about what kinds of supports might be provided for residents of those tiny homes?
There will be on-site services. How it's gonna work is that the tenants will each have there's 30 units, and they're sort of like containers, and they will each have, like, a bed and a dresser and a place where they can store their belongings. There's no washrooms within them, there's no kitchen facilities within them, but there is a communal space, if you will, where there will be meals, there's going to be services. There will be, from what one of the BC Housing folks at that event told me, there will be harm reduction services, so folks will be able to use drugs under the someone will be there to observe them to make sure that they're safe. There will be health services that will be brought onto site. Yeah, so they'll have access to a wide range of services, which, some of the supporters, think that that's the way, that's the route out of homelessness and out of their addiction is to be provided with support.
And is the province stepping up to help with this?
Well, BC Housing is funding it but the city will be providing some funds in there as well. But mostly it's the majority of the funds do come from BC Housing through the province. It's part of the Heart and Hearth program that's in communities and across the province.
Right. I know we've talked before about the provincial government's support for housing initiatives, and Janice, how's that affecting your community?
Do you mean for like the transitional home?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that Coquitlam is watching New Westminster quite closely, and we have a supportive home in Coquitlam called 3030 Gordon. It's operated by Rain City, and it has had some serious issues that have had some serious issues in the neighborhood. And there's been an encampment around it, and there's some challenges that need to be dealt with by the province, by the city, and there seems to be a lot of lip service that's been done for the past 10 years, and we hope this doesn't happen in New Westminster.
And Cornelia, how is that issue playing out in Burnaby?
Sorry. Can we start that again?
Yeah, sure. How is that playing out in Burnaby, Cornelia?
Well, as we discussed last time, a big project on Imperial Street in Burnaby was canceled by BC Housing amid multiple protests at City Hall from people who were concerned about some of the things that Janice is talking about, calling this supportive housing, drug housing, etc., and concern around that. There also is some pushback and protest against a shelter that's being moved to the Gilmore diversion. That's just moving from another place. But the city of Burnaby, Mayor Hurley has talked about the fact that that's not city-owned property, unlike the Imperial Street project. So there's not much the city can do except for to give input on that. But yeah, definitely that's going to be an issue in the next election, whether that really should be municipal or not, a hot issue in Burnaby.
Thank you for that. And now we turn to a segment I'm calling Freshet 911, where we take a look at some of the stories this week that involved emergency responders. Janice, I'm going to turn to you for the first of these, involving a woman who was allegedly asleep at the wheel of her Tesla while driving. What was that all about?
This was a woman who was driving through Coquitlam. We don't know if she is from Coquitlam. And BC Highway Patrol pulled her over. They saw her fast asleep at the wheel and took a photo and presented it to the public as a warning that you cannot do this while you're driving. Self-driving vehicles in Canada are not allowed, and this is an example that you should not rely on your vehicle, your electric vehicle, to drive for you. And there is a lot of debate right now about self-driving vehicles and whether they are safe and whether they should be allowed, and a lot of access to mobility. A lot of questions being raised about these kind of vehicles. But in terms of the safety of this driver, she did get quite a fine.
That is fascinating. I'm guessing it's the province that is going to be regulating that?
I'm not sure if it's federally regulated or provincially regulated, but I'm sure someone's looking at this right now and saying, we can't be having drivers who are behind the wheel who think that the car can drive for them.
Yeah, driving is not sleepy time.
No. And it was raining, and it was during morning rush hour.
Oh,
So
boy.
not a good time to be falling asleep.
Well, I also saw we had another story about a truck being pulled over with a sandwich bag for a fuel cap on the truck. I would definitely want to hear more about that.
Okay, well, that happened in Burnaby. Actually, the Freshet News reported on a pair of commercial vehicle enforcements, as they call them. There's a thing called the Lower Mainland Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Team that brings together police agencies and other safe driving agencies from around Metro Vancouver, and they team up and they go to different communities and have these enforcements. And in Burnaby recently, they did one, and among the trucks they pulled over was one particularly egregious violator who ended up, okay, hang on, that got pulled over, and among its violations was the fact that the fuel cap was missing and the fuel area was being covered by a sandwich bag which had been wrapped around with a charging cord. But that wasn't all. It was also the gas tank was strapped on with unrated straps that were frayed and getting damaged. The steering mechanism was defected. The emergency brake was inoperative. The trailer's axle, because it was a truck and trailer unit, the trailer's axles and wheel housing were bent because of being repeatedly overweight. This is a chronic problem in Burnaby. The Burnaby RCMP's designated commercial vehicle inspector, lone constable Kevin Connolly, has been working on this for years. And he's always told me, I've covered this for some time, he's always told me that Burnaby's central location means that it gets a ton of commercial vehicle traffic through it. And since he's been checking these vehicles, about 50 to 60% fail and are taken off the road because of safety violations. And I've often asked him when he's going to move to a name and shame kind of approach where, right, till now, they show us photos of the vehicles, they allow us to publish them, but their identifying information is obscured and license plates, that kind of thing. And what he's told me is that they're still taking an educational approach. They're still trying to educate commercial drivers to make sure that they know what the requirements are and that they're safe, et cetera. But I don't know. Sometimes when I see some of these reports, I think they should, along with the fine, which, and this driver was fined $1,215 for the various violations. But sometimes I think it would be better if the public knew who were the violators and they could decide whether they want to do business with them, because this is a serious public safety concern, given the size of these vehicles usually.
Yeah, I mean, even if it was the trucking companies involved, that would be a really useful thing to know.
Yeah, exactly. I would think so. But for now, the RCMP is taking an educational approach.
Anybody else got a Freshet 911 story they want to offer?
It's been a quiet week in the New Westminster Police Department in terms of what they've been posting. They did notice that they used their drone once again to apprehend a suspect after somebody was seen with a gun. But then I did check in with the other detachments in the New West, Burnaby, and Tri-Cities area to see who else is using drones. I've found that Coquitlam RCMP has multiple drones and drone operators. They launched their program about 3 years ago. Burnaby RCMP has one drone that it's deployed in certain circumstances, including public events and searches for missing people. Port Moody Police Department does not presently use drones, but it's looking into it. It seems that this is the way that the police departments are going. New West just launched their program at the beginning of February, and they've already used it at least twice that I'm aware of. And both times were for calls regarding people with weapons. So I think that it provides a little bit of sort of safety for those officers when they're responding, if they know that, what they're potentially dealing with.
Fascinating.
Speaking of firearms, I do have another thing. I mean, in Burnaby, there was a large police response at a high-rise near Lougheed Highway and Douglas Road for a 39-year-old man with injuries consistent with a gunshot. It turns out that he was taken to hospital in stable condition, but it turns out that was an accidental. Police believed it was an accidental gunshot wound. So careful with those firearms.
It sounds like wise advice at any time.
You are listening to the Freshet Friday podcast for March 27th, 2026.
Okay, well, now we turn to some fun. Janice, tell us about what's on this week.
Well, Jeff, this is the weekend to spring clean your home, and there are lots of things happening to help you do that. Lots of organizations that are having recycling events, like for electronics in Burnaby, in Coquitlam, in New Westminster. I just want to point out the recycling event on Saturday in New Westminster. It's at City Hall, and you can bring your consoles, you can bring your iPods, you can bring your MP3 players, and you can get them recycled, and that's a great way to dispose of them. Also on Saturday, we're going to turn off the lights between 8:30 and 9:30 on Saturday night, and put the candles on, and remember what it's like without any power on, and that's to bring awareness to the planet. We also have this weekend the Tri-City Home Show, which is always really, really well attended. That's going to be at the Poirier Sport and Leisure Center. And I do want to mention that this is the last home game for the season for the Coquitlam Express. It is at the Poirier Center, and they're playing Powell River.
Exciting.
Can I just jump in here with a couple of new West events, Geof?
Sure.
Okay, next week on Thursday, April 2nd, the Royal City Farmers Market is in Tipperary Park. It actually got underway yesterday, but if you go on April 2nd, you'll be able to stop by the Freshet booth and say hi to us, and maybe even get one of our new hot off the presses buttons.
Well,
In addition to that, New Westminster's got a couple of events coming up for the Trans Day of Visibility on March 30th and 31st. I'll be writing a story about that, so if folks are interested in that, they should go online at freshetnews.com.
and I'd also just like to put in a plug here for the Freshet table at the home show. Janice and I will be there, and we will have copies of the Freshet News print edition, which came out yesterday. Any other upcoming events people want to highlight?
I'll highlight the Easter is coming up, and lots of children's events happening. That starts Good Friday, which is April 3rd, and we have events at the Bonser Recreation Complex in Burnaby, at Mackin House, at the Lions Park in Poco, and the Village of Ammore has their event, and they're pretty much all free. And there's no registration, and encourage families to get out and
Now,
find some.
is there an Easter egg hunt in there somewhere?
Yeah, all of them are Easter egg hunts.
Fantastic. I love a good Easter egg hunt. All right, well, I want to turn to you now, Mario. I saw your story about the Port Moody dragon boating program, and I loved it. I also loved the way you highlighted several of the participants. Do you want to talk a little bit about working on that story and about the program itself?
Yeah, there's excuse me. There's several dragon boating clubs that operate out of Old Mill Boathouse in Port Moody at Rocky Point Park. And one of them reached out a few weeks ago and said they're starting a youth program. They feel there's a space there for young people who want to be active and participate in some kind of competitive realm, but maybe aren't necessarily drawn to the traditional sports like soccer and that. And so we arranged to get out there one morning when they were going to be working with some of their young people. And so I went out last Saturday. Luckily, it was not raining that day. And yeah, they had maybe half a dozen or 8 young people from 15 to 23, I believe, is sort of the age range they're looking at. And they get a chance to get in one of the big boats and row with experienced paddlers, and out on the waters of Burrard Inlet. And it was interesting. It was an eclectic group of people. One young man who was one of the first there, AJ Moya. He had this bright shock of dyed hair and a nose ring, and I think this is exactly what I was looking for. This is a kid who probably would never play soccer, and he said, he even said, I asked him, what part? He said, well, he doesn't get out much, but he thought this might be something interesting to try, and yeah, they're running another session on Saturday tomorrow from 9 a.m. at the Old Mill Boathouse. If you're a young person, you can just show up, and they have paddles and life jackets, and you'll get to go spend about an hour out on the waters of Burrard Inlet. Again, teamed with experienced paddlers, so you can sort of learn the ropes from them. And yeah, they're all gearing up for the big inlet spring regatta is coming up later in April. It's sort of the first big event of the paddle or the dragon boating season in Metro Vancouver, which is quite a active season. Dragon boats no age bounds. There's senior dragon boaters. There's Breast in a Boat, which is women who've survived breast cancer. Dragon boaters. They also have a team that operates out of the Rocky Point Park. It's really a very and it's one of those sports where you can fit in easily, and it's not the individual performance isn't what matters. It's working together as a team. You learn a lot of useful skills, communicating, and all learning how to paddle in the same direction at the same time. It's all about timing, and yeah, you're outdoors, and on a nice day, there's fewer better places to be than on the water. And we're going to be having, we ran it online, but we're going to be running it in our next edition of the paper coming up on April 16th, I believe, with an even more fulsome account with more photos.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mario. And I want to turn to your favorite stories of the week. So maybe we'll start with you, Cornelia. What was your favorite story of the week? Either one that you wrote or that you're working on?
I think one of my favorite stories was covering the comments that councillors made about Councillor Alison Gu when she, at the council meeting last night, stepped down officially or announced that she wouldn't be running again in October's election. She's been such a passionate voice for her different causes, that kind of thing. And there was clearly respect around the table, even though we've seen sparks flying between her and some of the other councillors. And some of the things they said about her really speak to, well, I mean, she was 24 when she was elected in a by-election in 2021. And that's very young. It's the youngest councillor ever elected in Burnaby. And that was at a time where, and Councillor Daniel Tetro pointed this out, when there was no one on council that was younger than 55. And frankly, most of them were a lot older than that at the time. So she was really a fresh voice. And he talked about how that would be inspiring for young people. And I certainly hope it's so. She's definitely brought a different voice to the table. She said that she just needs to reset and it needs to take time, and that it's a very demanding position to be in. But she's very proud of the work she's done, and the councillors really seem to respect that. And it was just a really inspiring thing in this time where people are kind of cynical about the political process. To hear people talking about a council, even though it doesn't agree all the time, it's working together and being able to hear diverse points of view that she, and she represents that.
Civility is inspiring.
Yeah, exactly.
How about you, Teresa?
Can I pick two?
Sure.
My favorite story that I wrote was, and I actually did write this last month, but it's just coming out now in the print paper, is about the new Westminster Public Library Seed Library. It is such a fun and important project that they've got going on there, and the passion that the librarian, Caitlin McRae, and all of her volunteers have is just amazing. They have thousands and thousands of seeds that they collect and distribute through the library. I encourage anybody who gardens or wants to try gardening to go there and check it out because it's just amazing. And then the other story, and I can say this because the paper's come out, is a story that Janice wrote, and it's I won't give too much away because it's her story, but it's related to victims of a serial killer and their family's quest to get items back. And it's just, even talking about it now makes me get a little choked up just thinking what these families have gone through. So folks should watch for that one as well.
Thanks, Teresa. How about you, Janice?
Thanks for that, Teresa. I just wrote a story. I posted it online called Here Come the Bears. Tri-City residents need to wake up to. And the bears are coming out. I've seen them in Coquitlam. And, if you don't, municipalities say if you don't, lock up your garbage and put it out at a certain time during collection time, you're going to be fined up to $500. And happily, in the Tri-Cities, we've gotten the message loud and clear, and it needs to be reiterated every year because somebody in the neighborhood doesn't lock their garbage, and here come the bears. And we need to be quite vigilant in the Tri-Cities because the Bruins are everywhere. And this year is going to be quite high. We already have an uptick in bears sightings. And once again, the city is going to be at the Tri-City Spring Home Show, spreading their message and making sure that people are aware that they have to lock down their garbage. They have to make sure that their barbecues are clean. They have to take out all the fruit from their backyard, from their fruit trees, and they have to make sure their barbecues are clean. And this has to be drilled into Tri-City residents every year. And happily, we are getting the message, but we need to keep, be strong and make sure that the bears are not destroyed.
That's a great message. And in fact, that was going to be my pick for a favorite story as well. So I've had the experience of having a bear wander into the backyard. And you really need to
Yeah,
be aware that we live amongst the forest creatures.
we do.
I mean, different than what you need to do if you see a skunk, but
Well, when they come in packs, it's a little chilling, but they do look cute from a distance, but you don't want them in your backyard.
exactly. How about you, Mario?
I am not a golfer. When golf highlights come on TV, my eyes glaze over. But it turns out we've got a young golfer, making quite a name for himself on the PGA Tour. AJ Ewart, he's the son of Brad Ewart, who was one of the founders of the Westwood Plateau Golf and Country Club. And I believe he may have even had a column in the old Tri-City News back in the 90s. I know I took his photo several times. Anyhow, he earned his tour card in December. They have to go through, often what happens with golfers, they have to play in this developmental circuit where they're earning, paltry sums of money and living the hard life. And then they go every year to this Q school, which I guess is a big tournament. And the top players from that get the honor of earning their PGA Tour card and playing with the big boys and playing at the fancy golf clubs and living the high life. And he's 8 events in, and AJ Ewart is 8 events into his PGA Tour career this year, and he's already won $533,000, more than that. He had his best finish last week at a tournament in Florida. He finished tied for 11th, and that alone earned him $211,575. Maybe I should have become a golfer.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I mean, that's a pretty good payday.
Yeah, for tied for 11th. I mean, holy Hannibal, that's a lot of money.
Well, thank you all.
And that wraps up our Freshet Friday podcast for this week. Thanks to the team for the great conversation and to you for listening. And don't forget to pick up the latest print edition of Freshet News at your local community center, city hall, or one of the select coffee shops and grocery stores where Freshet News is available.